All right, pop a top. Settle in. You want a story? I got one that'll curl your toes and make you check your own pulse. This ain't one of those tall tales the rookies tell about outrunning a bear in Wyoming or finding a winning lottery ticket in a bag of pork rinds. This is the gospel truth, the honest-to-God story about the time the universe decided to drop a Slavic supermodel into my passenger seat in the middle of a God-forsaken Iowa cornfield. And let me tell you, boys, sometimes the universe knows exactly what it's doing. It was late. I mean real late. The kind of late where the world gets quiet and weird. 2 a.m. The kind of late where the only things still awake are truckers, coyotes, and dudes watching questionable videos on their phones in the glow of their dashboards. I was parked at a grimy little fuel stop off I-80, a place called The Beacon that looked like its beacon had burned out sometime during the Carter administration, and nobody had the heart to tell it. The air was thick and heavy, so humid you could chew it. It smelled of freshly cut grass from some nearby farm, hot asphalt, still bleeding heat from the day, and that electric tang of impending rain. You could feel the humidity sitting on your skin like a wet blanket, making your shirt stick to your back. The whole world was dead quiet, except for the deep gut-level hum of my reefer unit, a constant thrumming that was the soundtrack of my life, keeping a full load of Nebraska's finest pork chops from turning into a science experiment. That, and the electric sizzle of a single fluorescent light above the diesel pumps, attracting a kamikaze air force of moths that thumped against the plastic cover in a pathetic, suicidal rhythm. It was one of those nights where the blacktop seems to sweat right along with you, and you feel like the only man left alive on the planet. My rig, Big Bertha, was thirsty. She's a Peterbilt 389, a long-nosed queen, and she takes 200 gallons of diesel like it's a shot of whiskey. And at today's prices, it ain't cheap. I was standing there, the heavy nozzle locked in, watching the numbers on the pump climb higher than my blood pressure after 3 days on nothing but lukewarm coffee and pure, unadulterated rage at four-wheelers who don't understand what a turning radius is. I'd been driving for 10 straight hours. My eyes felt like 2 piss holes in the snow, and my brain was a sludge of road hypnosis, caffeine jitters, and the lingering ghost of a gas station burrito that was currently staging a violent protest in my lower intestine. My plan was simple. Fill up, park in the dark, dusty backlot, and pass out for a few hours before the sun came up. That was the plan. But plans, as they say, are what you make while God is upstairs, laughing his ass off and spilling his beer. I was about to top her off, listening for that satisfying click of the auto shut-off, when I saw the movement over by the sorry excuse for a convenience store. It was a silhouette at first, a flicker of motion standing under the flickering porch light next to an ancient, rust-streaked payphone that probably hadn't worked since payphones were a thing people actually used. The light above her buzzed and sputtered, casting her in and out of shadow, making her look like a ghost flickering at the edge of the world, a glitch in the matrix of this miserable truck stop. Even as a shadow, she had my full and undivided attention. It was the way she stood, not slumped or tired like every other soul dragged into this purgatory by a need for fuel or a weak bladder. She stood ramrod straight, poised, her back like a steel rod, like a dancer waiting for her cue or a queen surveying a kingdom of filth. As I got the pump clicked off, the heavy nozzle clanking back into its cradle with a greasy thud, and started the long walk over to pay the king's ransom for my fuel, the details started coming into focus, and holy hell, what details they were. She was tall, impossibly tall, all legs, Like she must have been 5'10", maybe 5'11", and a good 4 feet of that was pure, unadulterated leg that started somewhere around her armpits. She was wearing some kind of dark, simple dress, a slip of black fabric that ended about halfway up a pair of thighs that looked like they could crack walnuts, or a man's skull. Her hair was platinum blonde, so bright it almost glowed under the crappy yellow light, and it was pulled back in a severe, tight ponytail that just made her cheekbones look sharper, like they could cut glass. She was holding a dead cell phone in one hand and staring at the chunky black payphone receiver in the other, like it was a piece of alien technology she'd just discovered. She looked like she'd just beamed down from the Starship Enterprise and was deeply offended by our primitive communication methods. She was so out of place it was almost comical. This wasn't just a diamond in a pigsty. This was the Hope Diamond sitting on a fresh pile of manure. Every instinct in my body, honed by years of observing the female species from the high perch of my cab, was screaming at me. This was a grade A, top shelf, once-in-a-lifetime situation, a unicorn in a field of tired, grumpy donkeys. I walked into the convenience store, the little bell above the door chiming pathetically. The air inside hit me like a wall. It smelled of stale hot dogs turning slowly on their greasy rollers, burnt coffee, and the cloying sweetness of pine sol trying and failing to cover up a multitude of sins. I paid for my fuel, the number making me wince. I grabbed a coffee that tasted like hot brown water and a bag of jerky that had the texture of a dried-out leather shoe. As I waited for the cashier, a kid who looked about 15 and so profoundly bored, he might have been clinically dead, to make change. I glanced back out the plate glass window. She was still there, but now she looked even more frustrated. She'd hung up the phone and was pacing, a tight little 3-step pattern on the cracked concrete. Her movements were sharp, angry, and yet graceful all at once. A caged panther. My brain, usually a one-track highway of mileage, delivery times, and meal times, had a full-on 10-car pile-up. One part of my brain, the sensible part, was saying, "Sam, you reek of diesel fuel, and you haven't showered in 2 days. Your breath could probably kill a small animal at 10 paces. Leave the poor, beautiful girl alone." The other, much louder part, the part that's gotten me into all the best trouble in my life, was yelling, "Are you blind? That's a damsel in distress, you magnificent bastard. A 5-star, championship-level damsel. Go talk to her, you idiot. What's the worst that can happen? She sprays you with pepper spray. You've had worse in bar fights. Confidence, boys. It's the cheapest cologne, and it works the best." I took a deep breath, puffed out my chest until my old Metallica t-shirt felt tight across my shoulders, and strolled back outside like I owned the place and was just checking on my property. I took a sip of the battery acid coffee and let the heat fortify me for the mission ahead. "Phone trouble?" I asked. My voice came out a little rougher than I intended, more gravel than charm, the product of 10 hours of silence and road dust. She snapped her head around, startled, her body tensing like a spooked deer, and that's when I saw her face properly. Man, if her legs were the appetizer, her face was the whole damn surf and turf platter with a side of lobster mac and cheese. Big almond-shaped eyes, the color of a pale blue winter sky. A full mouth that was currently set in a hard, frustrated line. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping up and down all 300 pounds of me. My worn-out jeans, my faded t-shirt, the 5 o'clock shadow that was working its way into a full-on beard. I saw a flash of alarm in her eyes, the kind a rabbit gets when it sees a wolf. It was quickly followed by something else. Resignation. desperation. It was the look of someone who's run out of good options and is now staring at the only option left. And that option looks like a grizzly bear in a trucker hat. "Nayet," she said, her voice a low musical thrum with an accent so thick I could feel it in my fillings. It was a fascinating sound. "No one work." She gestured at the payphone with the receiver, then at her own dead phone, a sleek fancy thing that looked as out of place as she did. "No. Battery. Eastern European, Russian, maybe. Polish, Ukrainian." All I knew was that it sounded like honey and gravel mixed together, and it did something to the hairs on the back of my neck. "Yeah, that thing probably eats your quarters and gives you a dial tone from 1982, I said, nodding at the payphone with a smirk. "It's a museum piece. Where you trying to get to, darling?" She looked at me with a blank, beautiful confusion. The word darling didn't compute. It just bounced right off her perfect high cheekbones. I slowed down, feeling like a moron. I had to switch to caveman speak. "Where you a go?" I asked, pointing down the dark, empty ribbon of I-80 that disappeared into the black Iowa night. She seemed to understand that. She dug into a ridiculously small, fancy-looking purse that probably cost more than my last set of tires, and pulled out a crumpled, glossy brochure. She flattened it on the hood of a nearby abandoned car, the metal still warm from the day's heat. She pointed. It was for a prestigious, world-renowned dance academy in Chicago. There was a picture of a dozen girls who looked just like her, all in black leotards, frozen midair, in impossible, elegant poses that made my back hurt just looking at them. "Chicago," she said, her pronunciation making the city sound exotic and mysterious. She pointed to a picture of a sleek tour bus on the brochure. "My group. They leave." Her finger tapped angrily on the photo of the bus. "I sleep in bus. They forget me." My heart sank for her. Jesus Christ. Left behind by her own troop at a 2-bit gas station in the middle of the night. Her phone was dead. No way to contact them. She was well and truly, royally screwed. I could see the panic starting to swim behind those icy blue eyes. A tiny crack in her perfect, composed facade. She was trying to hold it together, but the edges were starting to fray. This was my moment. The universe had lobbed me a softball the size of a watermelon. It was time to swing for the fences. I pointed to myself. "Sam." Then I pointed to my rig, Big Bertha, gleaming under the lights like a giant metal god, waiting to carry her away. "My truck. I go to Chicago. Right now." Her eyes followed my finger to the truck, and they went wide. It's a Peterbilt 389. A long-nose beast. The chrome was polished. The paint was a deep, metallic blue. It's my pride and joy, and it has a certain effect on people. It's not just a truck. It's a statement of power and purpose. Her jaw dropped just a little. She wasn't just seeing a truck. She was seeing power, safety, a way out of this nightmare. A flicker of hope ignited in her face, warring with a very healthy dose of suspicion. I mean, look at me. I'm a mountain of a man who looks like he wrestles bears for a living and eats what's left over. I probably wouldn't get in a truck with me either. To her, I probably look like every bad guy from every American movie she's ever seen. "You take?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The word was loaded with meaning. She was asking for a ride, but she was also asking if I was a serial killer. It was all there in her eyes, that desperate calculus. "Yeah, I'll take you," I said, giving her what I hoped was my most charming, non-threatening grin. It probably looked more like a grimace from the gas station burrito, but I gave it my best shot. It's a long drive. I could use the company. I leaned in a little, lowering my voice so she had to lean in too. The air between us crackled. I could smell her perfume now, faint but distinct. And honestly, I added, you look like you're about 5 minutes away from trying to fight that payphone, and I'd hate to see it get hurt. A small, surprised laugh escaped her lips. It was like the sound of ice cracking on a frozen lake in the spring, a beautiful, unexpected sound. The tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction. She looked from my face to the truck, then back to my face. She was making a calculation, a big one, weighing the devil she didn't know against the hell she was currently in. Finally, she gave a tiny, sharp nod. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Sam." The way she said my name, hissing the S, it sent a shiver right down my spine and settled somewhere low in my gut. It was a sound I wanted to hear again. "All right then," I said, my heart doing a little kick drum solo against my ribs. I felt like I'd just won the Super Bowl. "Let's get you loaded up. Name's Katya, by the way?" I asked, pointing at her. I was guessing, but I wanted to hear her say her own name. "Katya," she confirmed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips for the first time. It transformed her face from beautiful and severe to just stunning. "Katya," I repeated, rolling the name around in my mouth. It tasted good. It sounded like a promise. "Well, Katya from Chicago. Welcome to the palace." Getting her into the cab of Big Bertha was an engineering marvel. Those steps on a Peterbilt are high. They're made for work boots and long legs, but not for a tight dress and delicate little heels that looked like they'd snap if you looked at them wrong. I got an eyeful of a long, toned leg that seemed to stretch all the way up to heaven as she tried to navigate the climb. She wobbled on the top step, her little heels finding no purchase on the grooved metal. I instinctively put my hand on her lower back to steady her. Her body was firm, athletic, all coiled muscle under that thin fabric. The fabric of her dress was thin and cool, but I could feel the warmth of her skin right through it, a solid living heat that shot up my arm like a jolt of electricity. She murmured something in her language, probably a thank you, maybe a curse, and slid into the passenger seat. My cab is my castle. It's my office, my dining room, my bedroom. It's spacious for a truck, but it's not a damn cathedral. The second she was in it, the entire geography of the space changed. It shrank. The air, which usually smelled of worn leather, stale coffee, and me, was suddenly and completely invaded by her perfume. It wasn't a cheap, sweet smell you get from a gas station air freshener. It was something complex and expensive, like rain on cold flowers with a hint of something musky and dark underneath that spoke of secrets. It was intoxicating. It filled every corner of the cab and went straight to my head, making me feel a little dizzy. I climbed into my driver's seat, the truck's air ride suspension sighing under my weight. I turned the key, and Big Bertha roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated through the seats, through the floor, right up into our bones. Katya jumped, her eyes wide, one hand flying to her chest, in a gesture of pure shock. "She's a loud girl," I chuckled, patting the dashboard, just happy to be moving. She nodded, her hand still on her chest. I could see the rapid rise and fall of her breathing. She was nervous. Hell, I was nervous. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel, and it wasn't from the humidity. I pulled out of that sorry little truck stop, the air brakes hissing like a giant snake, waking from a long nap. As we merged onto the dark, empty interstate, the big diesel engine settling into its happy place, I glanced over at her. She was plastered to the window, her beautiful face illuminated by the rhythmic flash of the passing lane markers. To her, the endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the blackness, the sheer size and power of the machine we were in, it was all alien. "Is very big," she said, her eyes scanning the dashboard with its dozens of glowing gauges and switches, then looking up at the high ceiling. "That's what they all say," I said with a wink. The joke flew right over her head like a 747. She just nodded seriously, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to take it all in. "In Ukraine, trucks not so beautiful," she said, running a hand over the polished wood grain of the dash. Her fingers were long and elegant, a stark contrast to the rugged, functional interior of the cab. The first hour was a mix of comfortable silence and a game of high-speed Pictionary. She pointed at things, and I'd name them. Moon, trees, bridge, dead deer. She'd repeat the words, her accent making them sound brand new and fascinating. She told me she was a ballet dancer, a ballerina. It made perfect sense. The grace, the posture, the legs that were probably registered as lethal weapons in 3 states. I tried to explain what a reefer unit was, telling her it was a big refrigerator for my pork chops, and ended up just making humming noises and shivering dramatically, which made her laugh that cracking ice laugh again. It was a sound I was quickly becoming addicted to. We were getting along, but there was still a wall there. The wall of 2 strangers from different planets who didn't speak the same language. A wall built of her justified suspicion and the simple fact that I was a huge, scruffy guy, and she was her. Then, my stomach decided to join the conversation. It let out a growl that was louder than the engine brake. It was a low, mournful, hollow sound of pure emptiness. "Food," I said, rubbing my belly for emphasis. "You hungry?" She nodded enthusiastically. Hungry." Her eyes lit up at the suggestion, the first purely unguarded emotion I'd seen from her. The next town on the map had a 24-hour diner, a real one, not a chain. It had a buzzing pink and blue neon sign that said, "Eat," with the T, flickering, and a parking lot big enough for my rig. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires like bones. Walking into that diner with her was an experience. Every head turned. The handful of late-night patrons, a couple of state troopers looking exhausted over cold coffee, a table of college kids on a road trip looking wired and giddy, a lone old man nursing a coffee at the counter, all stopped what they were doing and stared. They saw me, a giant in a greasy Metallica t-shirt and a worn trucker hat, and then they saw her, a goddess in a little black dress who looked like she'd just stepped off a runway in Paris. The collective thought bubble in the room was probably, "How the hell did that happen?" I just grinned, feeling like I'd won the lottery, and steered her to a booth in the back, my hand on her back again, feeling that solid living heat right through the thin fabric of her dress. The booth was red vinyl, cracked and patched with silver duct tape in a few places. The table was a little sticky, with her sitting across from me, the harsh fluorescent lights making her platinum blonde hair shine like a halo. It felt like we were in a movie. She looked at the giant laminated menu with wide-eyed wonder, like she was trying to decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls. "What is the Gutbuster breakfast?" she asked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the page. The special was highlighted in a bright yellow box. "That's a heart attack on a plate," I explained, leaning forward, enjoying the way her eyes widened. 4 eggs, half a pound of bacon, 4 sausage links, a whole stack of pancakes, a mountain of hash browns. You eat that, you don't eat again for a week. It's a challenge. She giggled, that beautiful, surprising sound again. The waitress came over, a woman who looked like she'd been working there since the dawn of time. She had a beehive hairdo that defied gravity, a name tag that said Flo, and a tired but knowing smile. She looked from me to Katya and back again, her eyebrows raised so high they were about to merge with her hairline. "What can I get for you, handsome?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "And for your daughter?" I choked on my water, sputtering and coughing. Katya looked confused, looking between me and Flo, trying to follow the conversation. "She ain't my daughter, Flo," I grumbled, wiping my mouth with a napkin. My face was burning. "She's with me." Flo just smirked, a slow, knowing smile that said she'd seen it all. "All right then, whatever you say, big guy. What'll it be?" Katya, in a moment of pure, unadulterated bravery, looked at the menu, then pointed at my chest. "He have gut buster. I have same." My jaw dropped. Flo's jaw dropped. The old man at the counter even looked over his shoulder. A girl her size, a ballerina, ordering the gut buster. This woman was full of surprises. Flo just shrugged as if to say, "It's your funeral," scribbled on her pad, and walked away, shaking her head and muttering something about young people. When the food came, it was glorious. 2 giant platters overflowing with grease and carbs, steaming and beautiful. A monument to American excess. I dug in like a man who'd been starved for weeks, a whirlwind of fork and knife. Katya, however, approached it like a surgeon dissecting a patient. She ate with a focus and delicacy that was fascinating to watch. She cut her pancakes into tiny, perfect squares, dabbing each one delicately in the puddle of syrup before eating it. She ate 1 piece of bacon at a time, crunching it with a serious, thoughtful expression. And to my absolute astonishment, she ate every last bite. She cleaned the plate. I was impressed. I was more than impressed. I was a little bit in love. A woman who could look like that and eat like that was a rare and precious thing. Over that mountain of food, the wall between us started to crumble, washed away by a river of coffee and maple syrup. We talked, really talked, using her few English words, my hands, and the salt and pepper shakers as props. I learned her troupe was on a U.S. tour. She'd fallen asleep with headphones on during the rest stop, listening to Tchaikovsky, her favorite. When she woke up, the bus was gone, and the world was dark and silent. She was 23. She missed her mother's cooking, which she described as many potato, much sour cream. She asked me about my truck, and I told her all about Bertha, my voice full of the kind of pride a father has for his child. When the check came, she pulled out her tiny wallet to pay. I saw a handful of colorful Ukrainian money and maybe 20 American dollars. I pushed her hand away gently. "My treat," I said firmly. "You're my guest. Rule of the road." She started to protest, saying, No, I must." But I just shook my head and put my credit card on the check. She relented, but she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was more than just gratitude. It was a look of reevaluation. Maybe the giant, hairy American wasn't a murderer after all. Maybe he was just a giant, hairy American with a big appetite and a soft spot for lost ballerinas. Back in the truck, the atmosphere was completely different. Lighter, warmer. The shared meal had made us a team. A weird, mismatched team, but a team nonetheless. She seemed to relax completely, kicking off her painful-looking heels and tucking her incredible legs up onto the seat. The cab felt even smaller now, cozier. Her bare feet, with their perfectly shaped toes and high arches, were just inches from my hand on the gear shift. I had to force myself to look at the road, my brain screaming at me not to stare. I put on some music, some old Johnny Cash, The Man in Black, Folsom Prison Blues. She closed her eyes and listened, a small contemplative smile on her face. "He sings of prison and death and shooting a man just to watch him die," she said. Her English, surprisingly clear and thoughtful, is very romantic. I laughed, a big loud bark that filled the cab. Only you would find Johnny Cash romantic. Most girls want flowers and chocolate. "In my country," she said, her eyes still closed, her head tilted back against the headrest. "Our songs are also sad. It is how we know we are alive. It makes the happy parts of life feel more happy." Damn. The ballerina was a philosopher. I didn't have a comeback for that. I just nodded and kept driving, the rumble of the engine and the mournful twang of Johnny's guitar filling the silence. As the miles rolled by, the hypnotic rhythm of the road, the warm cab, and the full belly worked their magic. She eventually drifted off to sleep, her head lolled to the side, and then with a soft little sigh, it came to rest on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid, my muscles locked up. I was suddenly afraid to breathe. Her hair, smelling of that intoxicating flowery perfume, was tickling my neck. Her breath was a warm, steady puff against my skin. My arm was pinned under her, and I could feel the gentle, trusting weight of her head, the softness of her cheek against the rough cotton of my t-shirt. My shoulder started to tingle, then go numb, but I didn't care. I wouldn't have moved for $1 million. I didn't move a muscle. I drove with one hand, my right shoulder and arm going from numb to dead, but I didn't care. It was the most comfortable I'd ever been while being in agony. I could feel the trust in that simple gesture. She felt safe with me. Me, a guy who looks like he eats guys like me for breakfast. It was a strange, warm feeling that spread through my chest, a feeling I wasn't used to. It was better than coffee, better than a good burger, better than making a delivery on time. I drove like that for almost 2 hours as the first hints of dawn started to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gray. Outside, the world was waking up. But inside the cab, it was still our own private, quiet night. Then I saw it in the distance, a dark, bruised-looking line on the horizon. The sky ahead was turning a sickly shade of green-yellow, like an old banana. The air pressure in the cab seemed to drop, making my ears pop. The light went flat and strange, like God had put a weird filter on the world. The radio, which had been murmuring old country tunes, crackled to life with an automated alert. Beep, beep, beep. The National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning for the following counties. My county was on the list. "Shit," I muttered, my stomach clenching into a tight knot. Katya stirred, woken by the change in pressure or the shrill alarm on the radio. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, looking disoriented and soft from sleep. "What is?" "Trouble," I said, pointing at the sky with my chin. The line of clouds was a churning, ugly wall now, boiling and moving with a terrifying speed. Big storm, very big, very bad. The first gust of wind hit the truck, a physical blow that made the whole rig shudder and swerve. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in solid sheets, instantly overwhelming the wipers on their highest setting. The sky went from gray to an ominous dark green-black. It was like driving into a monster's throat. "We gotta get off the road," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Now." My voice was tight, all business. All the sleepiness was gone, replaced by a shot of pure, cold adrenaline. I saw an exit ramp for a state park a mile ahead. It was our only option. I muscled the truck off the highway, the wind fighting me the whole way, trying to push all 80,000 pounds of Bertha into the ditch like she was a toy. The park was deserted, the entrance gate swinging wildly on its hinges. I drove down a narrow access road, trees whipping back and forth on either side like they were in agony. The wind was howling now, a high, screaming sound like a freight train bearing down on us. I found a small gravel clearing, surrounded by thick woods that might offer some protection, and pulled the truck in, facing the trees. I killed the engine and set the brakes, the red knobs popping out with a satisfying thwump. The cab was plunged into a roaring darkness, lit only by strobing flashes of lightning that made the world outside look like a black and white photograph of pure chaos. The truck was rocking violently, not from us but from the sheer force of the wind. A branch scraped across the roof with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, making us both jump. Katya let out a small, terrified whimper. She was pressed against the passenger door, her eyes huge and white in the dark, reflecting the lightning flashes. She was genuinely, deeply scared. "Hey, hey," I said, my voice low and calm, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It's okay. This truck weighs 40 tons. We're not going anywhere. We're safe in here." She was shaking her head, whispering things in Ukrainian, probably prayers. Her hands were gripping the armrest so hard, her knuckles were white. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The click was loud in the roaring silence between gusts. "Come on," I said, my voice gentle. "Get away from the window." She looked at me, her fear so palpable I could taste it like ozone in the air. I motioned for her to come to the middle of the cab. She slid across the seat, her body pressing against mine. She was trembling like a leaf in the wind we were hiding from. I did the only thing I could think of. I put my arm around her and pulled her tight against my side. "It's just wind and rain," I murmured into her hair, which smelled like heaven. Bertha's handled worse. It was a lie. Bertha had never handled anything like this. She buried her face in my shoulder, her hands gripping my t-shirt like she was trying to climb inside it. I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against my own. The storm raged outside, the wind screaming, the rain lashing against the glass. But inside, in our little bubble, there was just the sound of our breathing and her quiet, terrified sobs. I just held her. I rubbed her back in slow, steady circles, whispering nonsense things like, "It's all right, and we're okay, and just a little Iowa weather." After a few minutes, her trembling started to subside. The initial terror was passing, replaced by a low, humming anxiety that vibrated through her whole body. The sleeper berth was right behind us. It's the most reinforced part of the cab, the safest place, a steel box within a steel box. "Listen," I said softly, my lips close to her ear, my breath stirring the fine hairs on her neck. "The back is safer, stronger. Why don't you go lie down in there until this passes? No windows." She lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at me. Her face was streaked with tears, her mascara running a little, her eyes luminous and huge in the dark. She looked at the heavy curtain separating the cab from the sleeper, then back at me. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, a small, jerky movement. I squeezed through the gap between the seats, my bulk making it a tight fit, and pulled the curtain aside for her. She followed, moving with that dancer's grace even in the cramped, rocking space. I followed her in and let the curtain fall, plunging us into almost total darkness. The only light was the faint, emergency green glow from the smoke detector on the ceiling. The sleeper was my sanctuary. A full-size bed, a small closet, a little TV. It was small, but it was mine. With the two of us in there, it felt like the world had shrunk to the size of this mattress. The roar of the storm was more muffled back here, a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. She sat on the edge of the bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, making herself as small as possible. I sat down next to her, leaving a respectable foot of space between us. The mattress dipped under my weight, and she listed slightly toward me. "See?" I said, my voice a low rumble. "Safer." Another gust of wind, stronger this time, slammed into the truck. The whole rig groaned and swayed like a ship in a hurricane. Katya flinched and instinctively slid closer to me, her shoulder pressing against my arm, her thigh against mine. The respectable foot of space vanished into thin air. "Is okay," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Is okay." We sat there in the dark, listening to the symphony of destruction outside. The heat from our bodies, combined with the humidity, was making the small space feel like a sauna. Her perfume was thick in the air, a heady floral scent mixed with the smell of rain and fear. I could feel the warmth of her skin through her dress and my shirt. Every nerve in my body was on fire, hyper-aware of her proximity, of the soft pressure of her thigh against mine. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and put her hand on my knee. It was a simple gesture of comfort, of connection in the face of the storm, but it felt like a brand. Her fingers were long and cool against the rough denim of my jeans. She just left her hand there, a silent anchor in the chaos, and the simple weight of it was electrifying. I covered her hand with mine. My hand is a catcher's mitt, big, calloused and rough from years of work. Hers was delicate and fine-boned, the hand of an artist. The contrast was electric. She didn't pull away. In fact, her fingers curled slightly, gripping mine. The storm outside was a monster, but the storm inside me was a whole different kind of beast. The fear, the adrenaline, the proximity, the darkness. It was a potent cocktail, and it was going straight to my head and points south. She turned her head, and even in the near blackness, I could see her eyes. They weren't full of fear anymore. They were full of something else, something deep and questioning and wild. The language barrier had been a wall. Then it was a fence. Now it was just gone. We were just two people, a man and a woman, trapped in a box, while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. She leaned in. I leaned in. Time seemed to slow down. The roar of the wind faded to a dull hum. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Her lips met mine. It was a kiss born of terror and relief. It was soft and searching at first, her lips cool and tasting of salt from her tears. Then, as I responded, kissing her back, it changed. It deepened. It became hungrier. Her other hand came up to my cheek, her long fingers digging into my stubble, claiming me. My arm, which was still around her, pulled her flush against me. I could feel the firm muscles of her back, the curve of her waist, the solid reality of her. A clap of thunder, so loud it shook the fillings in my teeth, rattled the entire truck. She jumped, breaking the kiss with a gasp, and pressed her face back into my neck, hiding from the sound. I could feel her breath, hot and ragged, against my skin. "Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling, but not with fear this time. It was a different kind of tremor. I didn't say anything. I just held her tighter, my hand moving from her back up to the nape of her neck, my fingers tangling in the tight knot of her ponytail, finding the elastic and pulling it free until her platinum hair cascaded over my hand like cool silk. She lifted her head again, and this time there was no hesitation. She kissed me with a ferocity that stole my breath and rebooted my entire system. This wasn't a gentle ballerina. This was a storm. Her hands were in my hair, pulling me closer. My hands slid down her back, tracing the sharp line of her spine, the swell of her hips, a territory I had only imagined exploring in my wildest dreams. The tight confines of the sleeper became our entire universe. She pushed me back, and I went, leaning back against the pillows. In one fluid, powerful motion, she was on top of me, straddling my waist, her dark dress bunched up around her thighs. The faint green light from the smoke detector caught the pale skin of her legs, the strong, defined muscles of her thighs. She was a Valkyrie in the gloom, a goddess of the storm, and I was her willing sacrifice. The truck was still rocking from the wind, but soon it was impossible to tell where the storm ended, and we began. The suspension groaned a new rhythm, a counterpoint to the howling gale outside. It was a frantic, desperate, glorious rhythm, a dance of sweat-slick skin and tangled limbs in the dark. She moved with a power and a purpose that left me breathless, a raw, athletic energy that was the polar opposite of the delicate dancer I'd imagined. This was no fragile flower. This was a force of nature. She'd murmur things against my lips, long strings of soft guttural Ukrainian. I didn't know what they meant, but I understood every single word. It was the universal language of touch, of heat, of frantic, desperate need. We were wrestling in the dark, a frantic, glorious battle against the storm and against loneliness. The windows I knew would be completely steamed over, our own private fog bank sealing us in. We were a secret in the heart of a storm, and Big Bertha just kept on rocking, a faithful accomplice groaning her approval with every gust of wind and every powerful movement we made. The tornado outside had nothing on the one inside my cab. I woke to silence, a profound, ringing silence. The storm was over. The only sound was a gentle dripping of water from the trees outside, a peaceful, cleansing sound. A pale, watery sunlight was filtering through the curtain, casting a soft, forgiving glow into the sleeper. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet earth, ozone, and her. I was on my back, a sheet tangled around my waist, and Katya was asleep on my chest. Her head was tucked under my chin, one arm thrown across my torso, one of her long dancer's legs hooked over mine in a possessive, comfortable way. Her platinum blonde hair, now free from its ponytail, was a wild halo spread across my shoulder and the pillow. Her breathing was a soft, rhythmic puff against my skin. The cab smelled of her perfume, of rain, and of the night's exertions. It was the best the old girl had ever smelled. I lay there for a long time, not wanting to move, not wanting to break the spell. I just watched her sleep, the rise and fall of her back, the slight flutter of her eyelashes against her cheek. It was the most peaceful moment of my entire life, a moment of perfect, absolute stillness after the chaos. Eventually her eyes opened. They were cloudy with sleep at first, then they focused on me. A slow, lazy smile spread across her face, a smile of pure, unadulterated satisfaction that made my gut clench in the best way possible. "Good morning, Sam," she whispered, her voice husky with sleep and the night's activities. "Mornin', ballerina," I rasped, my own voice thick and unfamiliar. She leaned up and gave me a kiss, a slow, deep, morning-after kiss that said everything we couldn't say with words. It was a kiss that tasted like promises and secrets, and the end of a very long, very good night. Getting untangled and dressed was a clumsy, intimate ballet of its own. We kept bumping into each other in the small space, our hands brushing, followed by lingering looks and small private smiles that made my stomach do flip-flops. The awkwardness of the first night was completely gone, replaced by the easy familiarity of lovers. I dropped her off in front of a clean brick apartment building in a nice neighborhood in Chicago. The sun was out, the streets were clean, and the storm felt like a dream from another lifetime. This was the end of the line. The silence in the cab was heavy, a physical weight. The party was over. "So," I said, breaking it, my voice sounding hollow, "this is it." She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her blue eyes full of a sad, sweet finality that I felt like a punch to the gut. She leaned across the console, which felt like a vast ocean between us now. She took my face in her hands, her cool, delicate fingers on my rough, stubbled cheeks, and gave me one last kiss. It was a long, slow, goodbye kiss, a kiss that I knew I'd be tasting for weeks. When she pulled back, she pressed two things into my hand. The first was a small, intricately carved wooden bird on a leather cord, the necklace she'd been wearing. The second was a small, neatly folded piece of paper. "For you," she whispered, her eyes holding mine for a long moment. "To remember." And then she was gone. Out the door, a flash of long legs on the sidewalk, and into the building without a look back. The cab felt like a tomb, empty, quiet. The scent of her was already fading, being replaced by the familiar lonely smell of diesel and old coffee. I sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring at the door she'd disappeared through, the engine idling. I finally opened my hand. The wooden bird was smooth and still warm from her skin. I hung it on my rearview mirror, where it swayed gently, a tiny ghost. I unfolded the paper. It was covered in her elegant Cyrillic script, a whole paragraph of it. I let out a sigh. A poem, maybe. A beautiful, heartfelt goodbye I'd never be able to read. Classic. A perfect, tragic, movie-style ending. I put Bertha in gear and pulled away, the hiss of the air brakes sounding like a sigh of loneliness. I drove for an hour, the little bird dancing in front of me, the city shrinking in my mirrors. The sadness was starting to set in, a heavy, unwelcome passenger. It was a hell of a story, but it was over. Then curiosity got the better of me. This was the 21st century, after all. I pulled over at the next rest stop, took out my phone, and opened the translation app. I held the camera over her note. The words shimmered on the screen for a second, then resolved into English. I expected poetry. I expected our night was like a storm, a beautiful chaos. I expected some deep, philosophical Russian farewell. What I got was Katya. Pure, undiluted Katya. It read, "You drive like a crazy man. Thank you for not being a murderer. Your truck does not smell as bad as I thought it would. I told my friends I met a giant, hairy American who eats pancakes for a living. They are very jealous. This was the best night of my life. Call me." And below it was a phone number. I stared at the screen, my heart doing a backflip. A slow grin spread across my face, a big, stupid, toothy grin that stretched from ear to ear. I threw my head back and laughed, a loud, booming laugh that filled the empty cab and rattled the windows. She wasn't a dream. She wasn't a poem. She wasn't a tragic memory. She was real, and she was a smart-ass, my kind of woman. I put the truck in gear, a new energy surging through me. I had a delivery to make in Joliet, and then I had a phone call to make, a very, very important phone call. Chicago wasn't that far out of my way on the return trip, after all. Not at all.